Hello everybody and welcome back to our lecture series. I'm Ted, your host, and for this lecture we are going to switch focus. We're going to leave the shores of the Eastern Mediterranean and we're going to travel over to the Western Mediterranean, but really the Central Mediterranean. And we're going to begin our look at the Romans. We're going to look at our Roman civilization, the genesis of Roman civilization. Now, the Romans are the very last of the great ancient cultures that we are going to survey. And of course, the Romans, they inhabited the central portion of the Italian peninsula. They inhabit the region along their city is founded along the Tiber River. And they hail from the central plains of Italy, a region known in antiquity as Latium, and known by its modern name Lazio in the contemporary Republic of Italy. Now, the Italian peninsula extends from north to south and for roughly 700 miles, and it is surrounded on all sides by water. The center of the peninsula, of the Italian peninsula, is dominated by the Apennine Mountains, and to the far north, they sort of are bordered, they're sort of capped off by the formidable Alps, by the formidable Alpine mountain range, and the Alps they extend into Central Europe. They form this massive sort of northern barrier, and there's not a lot of routes that can be exploited to allow access in or out of northern Italy, out of or into the Italian peninsula. So it serves as has very strong geographic features, very strong natural barriers for Italy, and they serve to sort of insulate the region from foreign invasion. They're very easy to defend. Once you take the initiative, you can defend those regions quite reasonably. Now, the Alpine Mountains, I'm sorry, not the Alpine, the Apennine Mountains. They're not very tall, and they're easy to traverse. They're easy to get around. And the surrounding region, the regions that surround the Alpine Mountains, the Apennine Mountains, I'm sorry, is an area that is very hilly and is not well suited for agriculture. Now, in Italy, all of the arable land, all of the good farmland, the good crop raising land, all of those lands are located along the coast. And below Italy lies the island of Sicily, which we have noted had been heavily settled by the Greeks. The city of Syracuse, of course, stands out in contrast. Stands out ahead of the pack. Has the greatest of the Greek colonies on Sicily, and of course the area of southern Italy, the boot and the heel area of Italy, had long been subject to heavy migration and settlement by the Hellenes. Southern Italy forms what we would now call Magna Graecia. And these regions are wealthier and more organized and more cultured than the rest of Italy. Now, Rome, the city itself, is located about, or at least was located about 15 miles inland from the sea. It's the foundation of the city is laid at the very first natural ford on the river Tiber. And the Tiber River, like all rivers, were key transportation nodes. Rome is roughly in the center of Italy, and Italy is roughly in the center of the Mediterranean. Now, Rome is ideally situated to expand into Italy and to dominate Italy, and then from Italy to the Mediterranean world due to this central location. Now, the founding of Rome is traditionally ascribed to April 21st, 753 BCE, which is the starting date of the ancient Roman calendar. Now, Roman history is divided into distinct phases based on the style of government being practiced by the Romans at the time. And we begin Roman history with the kingdom. And the kingdom stretches from roughly 753 to 509 BCE. Next is the Roman Republic. And the Roman Republic came about when the elites ruled in an oligarchic form of government, and the Republic lasts from 509 to 31 BCE. And the final and the last period of Roman history is the Empire, which saw Rome ruled by emperors. In the Empire, the imperial phase lasts from 31 BCE to either 476 BCE in the Western Mediterranean, or you can count it as lasting until 1453 in the Eastern Mediterranean, with the final collapse of Constantinople, with the fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Turks. Now, we have no surviving contemporary accounts for the founding of the city of Rome. All of our sources are taken from Roman sources, and these Roman sources are really propaganda. The archaeological evidence tells us that the site of Rome has been inhabited since at least 1000 BCE, and this is based on graves. One of the legendary accounts for the founding of Rome is that the city was founded by the twin brothers, Romulus and Remus. Romulus and Remus were presented as the sons of the god, the war god Mars, and a Vestal Virgin. They were abandoned as babies. And through a set of complex circumstances, they are found and then suckled by a she-wolf. And then they were rescued by a peasant farmer, by a peasant family who took them in and raised them. And eventually the brothers decided to go on and found a city of their own. So they returned to the site where the she-wolf had found them and suckled them, and they raised their city there. Now, while they were planning on founding the city, the brothers quarreled over who should be king and who the city should be named after. And out of this quarrel, Romulus slew his brother Remus. Now, in another version of the story, the brothers do not quarrel about founding the city. They simply named the city after them jointly. But Remus dies in a mishap. He's riding his horse drunkenly through the cities of Rome, and he falls off his horse, and then he dies. He dies in this mishap, and Romulus goes on to rule by himself, and he, of course, names the city Rome after himself. Now the story of Romulus slowing Remus is the more prominent one, and it was the one that was really spoken of during antiquity. And at its core, the story is a story of fratricide. It's a story of brother killing brother, and it is very telling because much of the subsequent history and the tone of the city of Rome and the Roman kingdom, republic, and empire will involve ambitious men battling it out to see who will control the city. It will involve brother killing brother, or brother being at odds with brother. Now, at the same time that Rome was being founded, and we can jump to 750 BCE. Rome at this time would have just been a tiny village of thatched huts. One of hundreds of settlements in Italy. Not the great power. Not the great power that pro-Roman historians or even yet pro-Roman lay people would like to think of. They would like to think of Rome being a mighty empire, a great power from the onset. That is not what descends to us. Rome was simply one of many small, sort of not even marginal, but negligible settlement scattered throughout the Italian peninsula. At the time that Rome was founded, there was already an expansionist power in northern Italy, the Etruscans. And the Etruscans exercised hegemonic control over the Italic peoples, and they ruled the Romans, and the Romans viewed them as outsiders. They were outside of the Roman periphery, and to the Etruscans, the Romans were outside of their periphery. Now, the experience of Etruscan rule will leave deep scars on the Roman elite and will foster a disdain for anyone holding power or authority over them. It also inspires paranoia regarding the influence of foreigners in Rome. Now, the Etruscans are a bit of a mystery to us. We do not know of their origins. They leave no great epic of their founding for us. not much of their history survives to us. We only know from writings of their adversaries and a few archaeological sites really anything about them. Two of their most important cities that we know of are Shabari and Tarquinii. Uh, and we there in those two sites we find very few buildings, but we find many subterranean tombs, and these tombs are covered with paintings. And it's clear that the Romans copied many of the Etruscan models of government, such as not just models of government, but also social customs, social patterns. One of which was the toga, and the toga to the Etruscans was a very public symbol that marked everybody. That marked everybody had the citizen in Rome. The Romans would often refer to themselves as the togated peoples. The toga used by the Etruscans was used in much the same way. Another social sort of custom or institution that was borrowed or taken by the Romans from the Etruscans were gladiator games. And gladiator games were held as part of competitions, part of the funeral rites or funeral games for dead leaders, for dead Etruscan elites. Now, Etruscan-style temples were also copied by the Romans for their own temples, as was the practice or the art of divination using animal organs. Those are Etruscan practices that we know of that were borrowed or taken by the Romans and used by the Romans. Now, the Romans increasingly grew tired of Etruscan rule, and during the period of the final king, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, or Tarquin the Proud, as he's remembered by the Romans, they rose up. And Tarquin the Proud, Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud, he is best remembered by the Romans for ignoring the advice of the Senate, for killing noblemen, the patricians, and for fitting the mold of a general tyrant. In 509, one of Tarquin's sons, Sextus, he raped a Roman noblewoman named Lucretia, who was the wife of another Roman of a Roman patrician, nobleman. And this outrage sparked a rebellion against Tarquin. And the leader of the rebellion was a man named Lucius Junius Brutus. And Brutus is remembered for swearing a very famous oath over the body of Lucretia. And this oath would create a family tradition in the gens or the clans Junia, and that would be Lucius Junius Brutus's family. The Romans set up a new political structure, a republic, in which power is spread out among the elite, which is in which there will be a hierarchy of government offices. And these government offices will be elected, the positions will be filled by election, and they went on to create an executive officer, a consul. But the executive officer was not to serve by himself. He was to have a counterpart. There would at all times be two consuls. There would be two co-consuls. Now, to make sure no man stayed in office long enough to accumulate enough power, the Romans set term limits of 1 year. Now, these positions were originally only held by members of an hereditary aristocracy known as the patricians. Now, once someone has served in office, they were automatically enrolled into the body of the Senate, which soon grew to comprise all of the distinguished men in Rome. And the ambition of every Roman patrician was to move up the ladder of offices, and these ladder of offices was known as the cursus honorum. The Romans were constantly in competition with one another. This competition explains really much of Roman history, and it is one of the driving factors for these patricians to go out and to raise their status in society, and this was all done to acquire dignitas. Now, dignitas is a Latin word that does not really have any straightforward equivalent in English. It is basically your worth or your value to society, and very much like one's celebrity status today, dignitas was fleeting. You could accomplish 5 great things today, and tomorrow you only really remember for 1 or 2 of them, and by the next day you're just another face in the crowd. It was very fleeting, dignitas was, and it was really a zero-sum game. If you gained let's say 20 points of dignitas, that means somewhere somebody else or a group of other people would have lost 20 points of dignitas. It was a zero-sum game like that. If you gain some, somebody else lost some. Now, Rome rises to dominance in Italy through warfare, becoming the principal city in Italy. And from roughly 509 to 250 BCE, Rome engages in warfare with one or more of her neighbors. And this typically, what we typically see are Roman victories, although there are some major setbacks, with multiple wars being fought before the enemy is subdued. Typically, Roman wars came in pairs. Not pairs. I'm sorry. Pairs imply a duo too. Roman wars came in sets of 3. There would be this initial war, this very major war, and then a mopping up action. But that's typically how the Roman wars were fought. In the north, Etruscan power was fading away, so the Romans were able to chip away at their territory before claiming it all for themselves. In central Italy, the Romans encountered a group of cities known as the Latin League. Rome and the Latin League signed the treaty early on, and it made them all equal partners in their endeavors and gave the Latins a preferred status within Rome. Now, together with the Latin League, Rome would go on to fight and subdue various Italic mountain tribes. And once the mountain tribes were subdued, the Romans at once turned on their Latin allies and attacked them all, conquering all of the cities one by one until everybody was under Roman rule. Now, the Latin League cities are all very similar in language and culture to the Romans. In the south of Italy, and the same goes with the Etruscan cities. They were all very similar in culture and in language to the Romans. In South Italy, there was another powerful confederation of cities, the Samnites. And the Samnites fought the Romans in 3 major wars. And the end result of the war was that the Samnites suffered some pretty major defeats by the Romans, but the Samnites also inflicted major defeats on the Romans, and the Romans had a very difficult time subduing the Samnites. One interesting side effect of the Samnite campaigns was the construction of the Roman system of roads. As consuls needed to move south in a hurry because they only had this 1-year term limit, they had to quickly travel, and the first Roman road was the road that ran north to south. And the road was named the Appian Way, the Via Appius, and it was named after the consul who built it, a fellow named Appius. Now, Roman roads had a very symbolic meaning. The Romans would go on to build roads wherever they went. It was almost like a territorial mark, and really the real territorial markers would be these milestones in which at every mile the Romans would lay down a stone telling you the distance from the city of Rome. So it was a very real sort of territorial markers of really just imposing themselves on the local peoples and the local terrain. Now, throughout their process of conquering Italy, the Romans had a very unusual process. Typically, with ancient conquest, the defeated seat or city was sacked or burnt, with the defeated population either being killed or sold into slavery. The Romans did not kill or enslave the populations of Italy. What they did, they signed treaties with these people that they defeated, and they granted them certain privileges. The city's population will be granted will be granted a degree of autonomy. They will be granted a degree of social rights. And really, the Romans at times were known to grant privileges to the entire elite body. Sometimes they would grant Roman citizenship to the entire elite. But more commonly, the Romans would grant these cities half citizenship. They would grant them half of the legal protection. They would grant them the legal protection, but not the voting rights within the city of Rome. Now, a third thing the Romans did was to declare the city a socius, or an ally of Rome. And the one common denominating factor in all of these treaties was an obligation to provide men for the Roman army on demand. That is, at any given moment, these cities had to have a body of men that could be sent out to campaign with the Roman army. Now, the Romans, they did not require taxes from everybody, but they did require men for their army. That was the driving factor within these Roman treaties, to maintain that they had this large body of men, of manpower to draw upon, and making this a universal condition of all treaties. Rome was able to draw upon the unlimited manpower of the Italian peninsula. The men who served with the Romans in the Roman army, they became Romanized. They learned Roman customs, they learned their Latin, and they began to see themselves as Romans. And through military service, Rome was able to Romanize the entirety of the Italian peninsula. The Latin language spread, the culture of Rome spread, and really this became the principal language and the principal culture of the Italic peoples. And that would sort of be their process of uniting everybody. This was the standardization of Italy. Now, the Romans had the capacity to be very generous to conquered cities, but they could also be very capricious to cities or to peoples who opposed them and opposed their rule. And in these cases, the Romans developed very brutal, if not efficient, means of sacking cities and culling populations and selling survivors into slavery. It was said that the Roman army was capable of enslaving up to 20,000 people a day on campaign, or that the Roman army could crucify an entire population of people. And the crucifixions, they would not be until death. It would be for a couple hours or a couple days, just enough to punish them, just enough to inflict a very real mental scarring on the population, a very real physical, mental, and emotional scarring on the people of the dangers of defying the Roman Republic. Now, in all these wars that the Romans fought against their Italic neighbors, they did not possess any superior technology. They did not have superior tactics or even really superior leaders. What they did have was a dogged determination to never give up, no matter the odds. During the long unification of Italy, the Romans became accustomed to thinking of war as a natural order, had the natural way of things. During a 200 period, and in this 200-year period, but the period in which the Romans unified most of Italy, there were only 10 years of peace in Italy. And this displayed an almost biological, if not pathological, need to go out and display great violence on somebody every year by these early Romans. Now, the Roman conquest of Italy brought them into conflict with the wealthy Greek cities of southern Italy. The most powerful of these Greek cities was a place called Tarentum, and Tarentum would go on to fight a couple of wars with the Romans. And during one war, the people of Tarentum, the Tarentines, they united the Greek cities, and the Greek cities decided to hire the best mercenaries that their money could buy, and they hired one of the more famous kings of the Hellenic world, and this was the generation, one or two generations removed from the careers of Alexander III of Macedon, and these men all viewed themselves as being potential successors to Alexander III of Macedon. And the king hired by these southern Greek cities of Italy was a king called Pyrrhus of Epirus, and he's a very noteworthy figure in his own right, because he was unlike other kings related to Alexander. He was of the royal Epirot line, and Alexander's mother was an Epirot princess. So there's a bit of a link there between Pyrrhus and his idol and his generational idol Alexander III. Now Pyrrhus had a storied career. He had won and lost the throne of Epirus. He had recently just won the throne of Macedon, and he was creating a reputation of one of the best military commanders of his age. And Pyrrhus brought his professional army of 30,000 men. There were 30,000 professional phalanx men and 20 war elephants. He brought this massive army over from the Greek mainland over into southern Italy, and he came to fight and do battle with these barbarians. And again, the Romans are unknown to the people, so to the shared culture in the Mediterranean that we've been discussing. That is culture that arose around this urban-based culture that arose around the year 3000. The Romans were not a part of that. The Romans were literally barbarians on the far side of the world that the civilized people, the Greeks of southern Italy, were complaining about. So Pyrrhus comes over into Italy to do battle with the barbarians, to scatter them, and to potentially pull the Greek cities of southern Italy into its orbit and to reap the benefits of those Greek cities. Now, Pyrrhus is coming from the Hellenistic world, and as we discussed when we looked at hoplite warfare, hoplite battles weren't really battles to the death. The Macedonians brought in the concept of battling to annihilation, but even with their concept of battling to annihilation, the Greek concept of beating somebody and then putting up a trophy or waiting for that, or beating somebody and waiting for that person to send envoys to discuss peace still remain prevalent. And with Pyrrhus and his generation, what they did was they would beat somebody in battle, put up a trophy, and wait for their envoy, wait for the envoy from their opponents to begin the peace process. The Romans' approach to war was different. They did not make peace. They refused to send envoys or negotiate if they were losing. The only peace would be a peace in which Rome was victorious. That was the Roman outlook, to never give up, to never surrender. They used their allies to raise armies. And the first army sent out is completely wiped out by the Romans. It completely wiped out. The first Roman army sent out is completely wiped out. Pyrrhus is utterly victorious. What happens after that is the Romans simply go back. They raise this second army and they go out to fight Pyrrhus once more. And again, Pyrrhus soundly defeats the Roman army. And after this battle, the Romans attest that Pyrrhus had claimed that one more victory like this and I won't have an army. And from this we get the term Pyrrhic Victory, which means a victory or an accomplishment that in the end signals your own defeat or signals your own downfall. Now the Romans, after their second defeat, they go back to their reserves, and again they can do this because they're not raising an army solely based on the city of Rome. They're raising armies from within the city of Rome, but also from their allies. So they're raising a third army to go out and battle to Rome, to go out and battle Pyrrhus. And Pyrrhus at this point is having difficulties with the Greeks of southern Italy because Pyrrhus is here and he's defeating the Romans. He's defeating them once, he's defeated them twice. He's expecting them to sort of just give in. And come to terms, for him to get some plunder, some booty, maybe some slaves. But this isn't happening, and everything is dragging on a bit too long for the Greeks of southern Italy. They wanted Pyrrhus to come in to beat them and then to leave. They have no intention of being drawn into any sort of imperial apparatus that Pyrrhus would have designs on. And Pyrrhus, of course, he had designs on beating the Romans and drawing these wealthy cities of southern Italy into an imperial apparatus to simply expand his own holdings and to expand his own imperial domains. Now, the Greeks of southern Italy, they, in an effort to get Pyrrhus to leave, they stopped paying him. and they sort of hold up in their cities, and they refuse to meet with his envoys or even meet with him. So running out of money, Pyrrhus decides that it's just not worth it, and he goes home. Now Pyrrhus won all of his battles, but in the Roman view and in the Roman eyes, he lost the war. And this is a view that many pro-Roman historians have sort of taken up. That they view Pyrrhus and Pyrrhus's campaigns as utter failures. And we can look at Pyrrhus as failing in this endeavor because he won all his battles, but he failed in his main objective, which was to expand his empire. Pyrrhus comes out of with Pyrrhus out of the way, with Pyrrhus returning back home, the Romans move in and they take over the cities of southern Italy. And by 264 BCE, Rome had conquered all of the Italian peninsula beneath the Po River. And they had access to all of the resources, the natural resources, the grains, the mineral wealth, the urban centers producing these finished goods. And they had this large population of men for the Roman army, for the Roman military to draw upon. And this will do it for our first look at the Romans. Hit like, subscribe, and comment. Let me know what you thought about this introductory lecture on Rome. We covered a lot. In our next lecture, we will look at what Rome does after 264 BCE. I am Ted. Hit like, subscribe, and comment, and let me know what you thought about this. And I will see you guys next time for another lecture.